Good morning. Welcome to the King's Report News Hour for Tuesday, the 10th year of Chungi, 15th year of Chungi, I'm sorry, the 11th month now, and the third day by the heavenly calendar. Tim Elder sitting in for the second king of Chungu, Hyung Jin-mun. Let's go to the places where he has established the Chungu flag. Right now in Chongpyeong, Tennessee, let's see, right now 26 degrees and partly sunny and cold. High today of 33, and tonight a low of 22, partly cloudy and cold. And then with a low of 22, yes. And then up in northeast Pennsylvania at the Turning Palace, currently 25 degrees, mostly clear skies, partly sunny and breezy with a couple of flurries today with a high of 39. 21 for a low tonight, partly cloudy skies. And then in Limestone County, Texas at the Liberty Rock RV Park and Campground, currently 36 and partly cloudy, high of 67. Tonight, mostly cloudy with a couple of showers late, getting down to 51 degrees. And then at the Suncheon Palace in Korea, 41 degrees under a little bit of clouds in the sky, and getting down to 30 degrees tonight. Tomorrow, sun through high clouds and a high of 50. The Gunma Palaces in Japan, 51 degrees currently under clear skies, getting down to 42 tonight. And then tomorrow, clouds and sun, high of 59. Okay, let's go to Father's Word. By the way, it's been pointed out to me that I sometimes lean too far forward. I would try not to do that today and see how it works. Okay. Let's see here. Okay, we are in the book on the restoration of God's homeland. Chapter 3, why we must do the Tongban Kyokpa movement. And Tongban Kyokpa, of course, is translated into English normally as breaking through on the neighborhood level. And I've explained that before. I don't think I need to do it today. And Father says here in 1988, why we are doing the Tongban Kyokpa movement again. I guess it's because it didn't work the first time, right? People didn't follow through. And Father here begins, this is September 5, 1988. So this would be just before the Olympics, right? Yeah. Just before the Olympics were held in Korea, later in September 1988. Anyway, why are you not doing Tongban Kyokpa? That is the path by which you can survive. That's the path by which you can survive. That's your path for survival, right? So why aren't you doing it? So under the foundation of this movement, and then this time go into your hometowns and go into your hometowns and go into your counties, your townships, and into your neighborhood, and take responsibility for all of those, and witness to the neighbors and the neighborhoods. He says Tong and Pan, which, as I've explained before, refers to the lowest of the administrative pyramid in Korea. In other words, you have a country, you have provinces, and then you have counties, and then you have cities and townships, and within those you have, anyway, the lowest of that pyramid is the Tong and the Pan. So the smallest neighborhood, like a block, if it's an apartment complex, for example, one building might be one unit of that, and then one floor, each floor of that apartment building would also be that's a unit. So there aren't many of us, and so you should go to your hometown and do this. Now, this is not a time to spend your time eating and sleeping like you used to before. All right. So this is more important than eating or sleeping. And his father saying, "Why aren't you doing this? But this is the way that you can survive." And survival certainly is an issue today, isn't it? through the recent election in the United States, America was given a second chance, as the king has said, and said again on Sunday in his sermon. But it would have been a lot easier to do if we had done a better job of educating people at the neighborhood and local level. God does not impose anything on humanity, right? He educates us. The Ten Commandments were not an imposition, they were education. And also God's word to Adam and Eve, this was education. And even as they were breaking his commandment in the Garden of Eden, God could not intervene because he could not intervene in the human portion of responsibility. Right now in the morning Hundoke, we are reading a lot about the human portion of responsibility. And so the king right now is going to the capitals of the seven contested states, the battleground states, where he is setting the condition by going around the state capitals 7 times in a Jericho march. And we certainly pray for his continued success and victory in making those marches. He's already done 2 or 3 of them. He still has about 4 more. I think he's done 3, and I think he has 4 more to go, I believe. So let's pray for his continued safety and health as he does those Jericho marches. Right. All right. Today we got a bunch of stuff. Let's see here. Well, of course, the big thing in the news still is the Hunter Biden pardon, and some lawyers are pointing out that actually this is a gift to President Trump, because now he will have a much wider latitude in pardoning people that he thinks have been treated unfairly by the justice system. And there are quite a few of those, starting with the January 6th defendants. Defendants, I guess that's the best word to use for them. The people who have been persecuted, and those who are in jail and who have been sometimes kept in solitary confinement for long periods of time, treated in ways that you would expect to find in places like maybe the Soviet Union or maybe China, or maybe some countries where the democratic process is not yet well developed, but it's happening in America. And it's clearly political persecution against these people. It's quite a situation, and I hope that President Trump can pardon those people as quickly as possible after he is inaugurated on January 20th. We have just under 7 weeks to January 20th. Probably 40 some days. What is it, 49 days or something like that? Sure. There we go. Yeah. I'll tell you when it comes up. All right, meanwhile, a lot of other stuff is going on. And recently, Syria has been in the news. Thought that had gone away. 48 days, 5 hours, 50 minutes, and 40 seconds. Anyway, 48 days, 5 hours, basically, right now, until his inauguration at noon on January 20th. Eastern time. Syria. You thought that this had gone away, and it did not, right? And it's sort of been simmering, but now that some of the belligerents, shall we say, have been weakened by the actions of Israel, namely Hezbollah, and also Russia has been distracted by Ukraine, and Russia is also a belligerent in this conflict. So other belligerents have taken advantage and have made significant gains kind of while people were not watching. This is the Wikipedia article. Let's take a look at this just for sort of our base from which we can start talking about it. The Syrian civil war is an ongoing multi-sided conflict. And yeah, multi-sided is right. I watched a video yesterday where the host named all the belligerents. it's, it's it's long. It's as long. It's not just A versus B. It is A B C D E F versus G H I J K L, and then it's not even clear. Sometimes even A and B start fighting, or so it's very complicated. So multi-sided conflict in Syria involving various state-sponsored and non-state actors. In March 2011, popular discontent with the rule of Bashar Assad triggered large-scale protests and pro-democracy rallies across Syria as part of the wider Arab Spring. Remember that? Protest in the region. After months of crackdown by the government security apparatus, various armed rebel groups such as the Free Syrian Army began forming across the country, making the beginning of the Syrian insurgency. By mid-2012, the insurgency had escalated into a full-blown civil war. And rebel forces receiving arms from NATO and Gulf Cooperation Council states. NATO, if it's NATO, then what? What does that mean? Well, a lot of that is the United States, right? So this is one of those forever wars that we've become involved in, and it's been going on now since 2011, right? Initially made significant advances against the government forces who are receiving arms from Iran and Russia. So this is, again, another proxy war against Iran and Russia. You can say that seems to be one way of looking at it. The U.S. is supporting whoever is fighting against forces supported by Iran and Russia. Rebels captured the regional capitals of Raqqa in 2013 and Idlib in 2015. Consequently, Russia launched a military intervention in support of the government in September 2015, shifting the balance of the conflict. By late 2018, all rebel strongholds except parts of Idlib region had fallen to the government forces. Okay, so forth and so on. But then, I guess this has not been updated. Okay, here we go. Between the March 2020 Idlib ceasefire and late 2024, frontline fighting mostly subsided, but was characterized by regular skirmishes, heavy fighting renewed with major rebel offensive in the northwest, led by Tahrir al-Sham in November 2024, during which Aleppo was seized. And that's what has happened recently. And even they were taking video inside Bashar Assad's palace, it appears. And it looks like Assad himself is in Russia right now. It looks like. There have been reports of him being, back in Syria, but it looks like he's in Russia. And the situation is becoming murkier as the days go on. So this is another war that President Trump is inheriting. And Hezbollah of Lebanon, the Hezbollah fighters in Lebanon were one of the belligerents. They were part of this as well. But now that Israel has substantially weakened Hezbollah, the rebel forces, now because Hezbollah was Iran-backed, right? And Iran and Russia were working together to to support the government. And Hezbollah was one of the sort of the tools that Iran was using for that purpose. Now that they've been substantially weakened, it seems that the rebels have decided to take advantage of the situation and to make gains. And I'm sure there are people in the security or the intelligence apparatus in Washington and elsewhere that are glad to see these anti-government forces doing so well. But we'll see how this develops. But it just goes to show that there are many forever wars going on, even though they may not appear in the news every day. So let's pray that God's will can be done there. All right, I want to go next to that missile that hit Dnipro in Ukraine a while back. And I want to go there because I noticed that there's some confusion, shall we say, confusion or a lack of clarity, maybe is the better way to put it, on exactly what is happening there, what happened there. And, in times like these, I think it's important for us to be as clear as we can on what is going on. And when we become clear, I think it's important for us to express that clarity to the extent that we can. Am I being clear? maybe I'm not being so clear. Okay. What I'm saying is that words have power. Okay. And if something is an ICBM, call it an ICBM. If something is an IRBM, call it an IRBM. There's a huge difference. There's an incredibly huge difference. And I think it does not help the situation for us to be calling this missile something other than what it actually was. If it were an ICBM, if Russia actually fired an ICBM, that would be a direct threat against the United States, because an ICBM is capable of reaching the United States. An IRBM is not capable of reaching the United States. It's an intermediate range. That's what IRBM, that's what the IR stands for, intermediate range. So this was not a direct threat against the United States. Now, maybe such a threat will occur in the future. Maybe such a threat is sort of already lurking in the background. But this particular missile was not that. And I want to go through this so that we can be clear about that, and so that we can express things clearly as we discuss this situation in the future. Okay. So here, this site seems to be pretty authoritative, and so let's go through it. Let me increase this a little bit so that you can read it with me. Okay. Russia says it used a hypersonic missile during the Dnipro factory attack on 21 November. Okay, so it's about 2 weeks ago now. It's thought to be a variant of the RS-26 missile Rubez, a shortened version of the RS-24 Yars missile, or Topol-MR, capable of being ground-launched from a transporter erector launcher, or a transporter erector. I don't see a picture of that here, but a transporter erector is basically you've got this vehicle carrying the missile around, right? Carrying the missile around, and then when it comes to a certain point, the vehicle will stop, and then the missile will come. It will come up, and it will be fired from that vehicle, a transporter erector launcher, or TEL for short. And because it can move around, it's more difficult for the enemy to target it before it gets launched. The RS-26 is thought to have come from the Kapustin Yar training ground in Astrakhan Oblast, a distance of 510 miles between launch site and the target. The U.S. Department of Defense has confirmed it was not an intercontinental ballistic missile, or ICBM. See, okay, and I know the Pentagon lies all the time, but Russia is also saying that it was not an ICBM, that it was an IRBM. And the only source we have for this being an ICBM was the initial report from Ukraine. And first of all, initial reports are often, in fact, almost always wrong. And secondly, Ukraine has a motivation to exaggerate things like this so as to get more aid from NATO. Okay, so I think at this point we can completely 100% discount the idea that this was an ICBM. And I think it is important that we do that we no longer call this an ICBM. Okay, so the U.S. Department of Defense has confirmed it was not an intercontinental ballistic missile, or ICBM, downgrading it to an intermediate range ballistic missile, or IRBM for short. The missile was identified by Russian President Vladimir Putin as an Oreshnik medium-range non-nuclear hypersonic ballistic missile. So let's look at what hypersonic missiles do. Normally, ballistic missiles travel in an arc from their launch point into space and then down through the atmosphere onto the target. Hypersonic weapons are different. In 2018, the Russians claimed that they had developed a hypersonic glide vehicle called Avangard, which they described as a gliding block. This sort of missile would be launched ballistically upwards, but then release the glide vehicle. Ballistically means that pretty much its trajectory, it's programmed to go to a certain place before it's launched, okay? And it goes to where it was programmed to go to. But in this case, you'll see that there's some variation here, but it's launched ballistically. In other words, it's launched according to a pre-programmed course in the beginning, but then release a glide vehicle which would skim the atmosphere on the edge of space. So it doesn't go quite as high as an ICBM. It can make turns to avoid high altitude interceptor missiles. Okay, so the ballistic part is when it is initially launched and when it's going up to the edge of space, and then once it gets up there, then it releases a glide vehicle, which would skim glide vehicle, so it does not have an engine attached to it. It's believed a version of the Avangard system can be carried on the RS-26 missile, which Oreshnik was developed from. In the videos of the missile strike in the Ukrainian city of Dnipro, you can see the missile has released 6 submunitions, which then released 6 smaller submunitions. A total of 36 separate impacts are the result. The munitions can be seen lighting up the clouds as they streak down. They also appear to be glowing, possibly from the heat of atmospheric entry, which would have taken less than half a minute to reach the ground from space, or the edge of space, actually. It's possible these munitions contained no explosive and were pure kinetic energy weapons. In other words, they just went thud or bang, they crashed into the building or wherever it is that they hit, or into the ground. Kind of like a meteorite, I guess. The energy delivered by projectiles traveling at Mach 10 or 7,000 miles per hour would be very high. So it'll create a big hole. The target was the PA Pivdenmash factory in Dnipro. It makes rocket motors and other space technology products. Dnipro, known previously as Dnipropetrovsk, was a center of Soviet Cold War ballistic missile production and was nicknamed Rocket City. The Ukrainians are unlikely to reveal how much damage was caused to the target factory. It's possible it was not even hit at all. Well, I don't know. If it wasn't hit at all, I think Zelensky would be saying, yeah, you guys missed. So I suspect they did hit something. But the point of this missile, though, of course, part of it was to hit something, but also part of it was to demonstrate that Russia has this capability. This was a missile that the West has never seen before in actual combat situation. And Russia wanted to say, hey, we've got this, and next time it may contain something that's going to go boom, maybe even a nuclear warhead, something like that. So watch out. Mr. Putin stated that it was a combined weapon strike, explaining the explosions caught on security cameras following the Oreshnik strike, which is possibly the arrival of Kinzhal or KH-101 missiles. Western military analysts are continuing to study the missile flight characteristics and target effects to find ways to counter this system in the future. For the Russians, the attack demonstrated a response to the Ukrainian use of ATACMS and Storm Shadow missiles. It also provided an opportunity to test their latest missile system in combat. And you know what? The Ukrainian war is providing that function for quite a few things, right? Various new weapons, especially drones. The use of drones in combat right now is being tested and developed. So the Ukrainian war may be seen later on as a a turning point in the history of warfare, maybe, in terms of drones, in terms of this kind of IRBM being used. I don't think an IRBM has ever been used in any conflict as far as I can think of right now. I may be wrong, but I don't think it has been, not in any conflict situation. ICBM, of course, not. ICBM, when you start shooting ICBMs at each other, that's when you really have a nuclear conflagration, and that's when basically the whole world, like someone said, the Third World War, if the Third World War is fought with ICBMs, the Fourth World War will be fought with spears and bows and arrows. Because that's ICBMs will have that effect. It'll send us back to the Stone Age, the entire world. All right, so that is that, and so I think let's learn from this, and let's anyway. I think I've made my point. Okay. All right then. Let's see here. Right now, things are relatively quiet right now after the big bang of Hunter Biden's pardon, and also sort of both the Middle East situation and Ukraine are kind of waiting for President Trump to come into power. And Biden really is not able to do very much, not able to provide leadership. Let's see here. Just making sure here on the Israel situation here 3 hours ago, Israeli strikes kill 11 in Lebanon after fire exchange with Hezbollah that test ceasefire. Al Jazeera says Israel bombs Gaza as ceasefire with Hezbollah hangs by a thread. Well, Middle East ceasefires go through that kind of a process, and so there's really nothing new about that. We hope that the ceasefire can somehow hold, but we'll see here. Let's see what Al Jazeera is saying. Al Jazeera, of course, is an Arab outlet, and so we have to take that into consideration. But let's see what they're saying. Israel bombs Gaza as ceasefire with Hezbollah hangs by a thread. Gaza's health ministry and the Gaza health ministry is always putting out figures which do not distinguish between civilians and fighters, and also may be exaggerated for propaganda purposes. We don't know. Maybe they're accurate, but I think we have to assume that they are probably exaggerated for propaganda purposes. Anyway, they say that Israeli strikes have killed 36 Palestinians and wounded 96 others in the latest 24-hour reporting period. The UN says food availability is at an all-time low across the entire Gaza Strip as Israel's blockade continues, with some Palestinians in the besieged north reporting completely running out of supplies. Okay, let's click this, read more here. Israeli forces have renewed attacks on southern Lebanon, killing at least 12 people and threatening a ceasefire with Hezbollah that went into effect last week. Israel's genocide in Gaza has killed at least 44,502. And so, yeah, Al Jazeera is keeping track of that and so forth. Okay. And the Qassam brigades, I believe that's Iran, right? No, I'm sorry, that's Hamas. Hamas, armed wing of Hamas, says fighters armed with machine guns have engaged in clashes with the Israeli forces. This was 9 minutes ago. Fighting is taking place near the Tubas governmental Turkish hospital and the Salhab area in north of the occupied West Bank city. Okay, so that's what Al Jazeera wants us to know about this situation. Okay, and let's see here. The Hunter Biden pardon various people are saying various things about it. I guess my reaction is, well, what did you expect? But if this helps President Trump have a wider leeway in pardoning people who actually deserve to be pardoned, I think that's probably going to be a good thing. And also, the Republicans are not going to stop their investigation into Hunter Biden, and they're going to be continuing that. So it's not the last word. So we'll see what happens. All right, let's go. Let's see. It's interesting sometimes to see what Google wants us to know. Google is leading with the Hunter Biden situation. Okay, in the New York Times, why Israel and Hezbollah are still firing amid a ceasefire. Okay. And Supreme Court to hear challenge to Tennessee's ban on transgender care. I have to follow that to see how that works out. Okay, and then Forbes has an article on that Orishnik missile. It says that it's not as dangerous as Putin thinks. Well, let's see if we can take a look at that. See if Forbes will allow us to take a look at that. I guess it's good to get another point of view. This is written by someone who says he's a South Lebanon-based technology journalist, consultant, and author. Okay. All right, well, let's take a look. You might know what he's talking about. Let me share this with you. It's still taking, okay, there it comes. There it comes. Okay, now you got it. The reverberations from the Orishnik ballistic missile strike on Dnipro continue to echo 2 weeks after the event, mainly because President Putin keeps making public statements about what an effective weapon Orishnik is. These are duly repeated by the media in Russia and abroad. The use of an intermediate-range ballistic missile with conventional warheads was a world first. So it was the first. Containing no explosive, the 36 submunitions inflict damage by kinetic energy, like a meteorite falling, as Putin put it, and also as I put it. The shower of artificial meteorites looked impressive, but the evidence suggests that it did little actual damage. The strike was more of an impressive firework display than a real threat. Well, it's a warning, all right? It's pretty obvious that the main purpose of this was to be a warning. Think tank RAND proposed putting tungsten rods on ICBMs in place of nuclear warheads back in the 1950s in Project Thor. The idea was used by science fiction writers, including Jerry Pournelle. Rather than simply descending at once, the rods would be left orbiting and redirected into come plummeting down on a selected target. Advocates like to claim that these rods from God, as they came to be known, could strike with the force of a nuclear weapon, but no radiation or fallout. Decades later, Putin is making exactly the same claims, stating that several weapons used in the same location would have an effect comparable in strength to a nuclear strike, and that we know in history what nuclear meteorites have fallen where and what the consequences were. Sometimes it was enough for whole lakes to form. Likely he is simply parroting what his technical experts have told him without questioning too closely. The claims are, here we have a little bit of a grammatical problem, but the claims are technically true, but only in a very narrow sense. The thing to remember here is that in the famous words of another science fiction writer in a work featuring kinetic bombardment from space, there ain't no such thing as a free lunch. With no explosive, the only energy in those warheads is what has been put into accelerating them to high speed by the burning of rocket fuel. In the case of the Orishnik, which is believed to be a direct derivative of the existing RS-26, the warhead of 6 independent reentry vehicles weighs about 1,800 pounds and, according to Putin, impacts at a speed of Mach 10. So this is an interesting graphic here. So it starts up like this, boom, 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 and then it separates here and here. Let's see. I'll read this for you. You probably can't read it. I can hardly read it myself. Multiple independently targetable reentry vehicle, MIRV. Okay, MIRV, and then it comes to the Earth's atmosphere, and then 6 warheads come out of this glide vehicle, I guess they called it. And the previous 6 come out, and then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. But then each of these then also had another 6, so for 36 in all. And here, maximum speed over Mach 10. And here, intermediate range ballistic missile, 6 warheads, first stage and second stage. All right, so let's continue here. This translates to a kinetic energy of about 3.6 billion joules, somewhat less than the explosive energy of 1 ton of TNT. This low number is not surprising. The total weight of the RS-26 is less than 40 tons, and much of this is taken up with the casing, rocket nozzles, guidance, warhead, and other elements besides the fuel. A large fraction of the energy goes in accelerating the parasitic weight, which is why stages are dropped as soon as they burn out. And while the rocket reaches Mach 20 in space, it loses half of its speed and 3/4 of its energy from atmospheric drag on the way down. There is no free lunch, and in fact, most of the energy put into the rocket is wasted. Hence, the kinetic armed Orishnik delivers as much energy as a 2,000-pound bomb. It is a big bang, but not in the same league as the U.S. Air Force's GBU-43 Massive Ordnance Area Blast, aka Mother of All Bombs, with a filling of a H6 explosive equivalent to 11 tons of TNT. Could you compare several Orishniks hitting the same spot to a nuclear blast? Well, the W-54 warhead, atomic watermelon, developed for the Jeep-mounted Davy Crockett nuclear weapon system in the 1950s, is generally reckoned the smallest such weapon ever built. On its lowest setting, it could be dialed down to a yield of 10 tons of TNT, or about 12 Orishniks. So in this limited sense, a large number of Russian missiles hitting the same spot could be compared to the smallest possible nuclear strike, except for one important issue. They cannot come close to hitting the same spot. The Orishnik strike hit the Yuzhmash plant in Dnipro, a facility previously used for producing spacecraft and rockets. There were no reports of casualties, and low-resolution satellite imagery did not show craters, demolished buildings, or in fact any significant damage to the plant, which had been struck by previous Russian attacks. Later, when high-resolution image becomes available, the effects still failed to emerge. The buildings are still standing. The strike may have done some additional damage to the buildings, but I don't see much. Dr. Jeffrey Lewis of the James Martin Center for Non-Proliferation Studies in Monterey, and the founding publisher of Arms Control Work.wonk.com told me. The video of the strike indicates that each of the 6 warheads released 6 submunitions for a total of 36 artificial meteorites, weighing about 50 pounds each. According to current test estimates, the RS-26 has a circular area probable, or CEP, of 20 to 250 meters, meaning that half of the projectiles would lie inside a circle of that radius. This is accurate enough for a nuclear warhead with a blast radius of several kilometers, but not for a handful of kinetic warheads. Well, so this, I think, simply underlines my point that this was intended as a warning of what could happen in the future with a nuclear strike, in the future. There was no nuclear warhead attached this time, but it is capable of carrying a nuclear warhead. All right. So anyway, a discussion is going on back and forth about what this actually means. And I'm sure that I will continue because this is the first time in the world that this IRBM was used in an actual combat situation. So in that sense, it's sort of an important event in the history of war, and it'll be studied from that perspective. All right, let's see. Times of Israel. U.S. said to warn Israel it is violating ceasefire in Lebanon, singling out a drone flight over Beirut. And here, China. Yeah, what's going on in China? In Bloomberg, I'm not going to click on Bloomberg because I know they're not going to let me see it. But central bank chief in China says, "Oh, we're going to support the economy in 2025." I'll bet you are. Yeah. It's one of those things where, if you don't succeed, you're probably going to, well, bad things will happen to you. All of a sudden, you'll be investigated for corruption, and bad things will happen. But all sorts of rumors are coming out about China, and I have no idea what's true and what's not. There are some people who insist that already a coup has taken place, and that Xi Jinping is actually sort of a puppet, just doing what he's told, and that other people are actually in charge. It's possible. It's possible. Not saying that that's true, but just saying that it's possible. We'll see. We'll see what happens there. Let's see here. China bans export of key minerals to the U.S. Well, I think this is about the rare earth. Well, it turns out that Japan recently discovered a big deposit of rare earth minerals in the ocean, the ocean floor. And these rare earth minerals are important for electronics, and including missiles and other things. China has banned export to the United States of items related to the minerals gallium, germanium, and antimony that have potential military applications, it said on Tuesday, the day after Washington's latest crackdown on China's chip sector. So this is good news for Japan, I suppose. Of course, the deposits in Japan were just recently discovered. I think other deposits have been discovered in the United States as well. So China, in the past, almost had a monopoly on these rare earth minerals, but it's becoming less and less true right now. Commerce Ministry directive on dual-use items with both military and civilian applications cited national security concerns by China. The order, which takes immediate effect, also requires strict review of end usage for graphite items shipped to the U.S. Watch out for those pencils. All right. So the United States and China stepping up their tension. The price of antimony trioxide in Rotterdam has soared by 228% since the beginning of the year to $39,000 a metric ton on November 28th. The data from the Information Provided showed everyone will dig in their backyard to find antimony. Many countries will try to find antimony deposits, said a minor metals trader in Europe. China's announcement comes after Washington launched its third crackdown in 3 years on China's semiconductor industry on Monday, curbing exports to 140 companies, including chip equipment maker Naura Technology Group. Trump, whose first White House term was marked by a bitter trade war with China, has said he will implement 10% tariffs on Chinese goods and threatened 60% tariffs on Chinese imports during his presidential campaign. So the tariff situation, which I discussed yesterday, is going to be ramping up more and more. And hey, listen, Biden has been using it too. Biden's been using it. Many of the tariffs that President Trump put in place are still in place under Biden for the past 4 years. And some economists or some journalists will say, well, tariffs just raise the consumer price. Well, but as we discussed 4 years ago, that's not necessarily true, because the exporter, in other words, the foreign company, wants to maintain market share in the U.S. market. And so they will reduce their profit or even export at a loss, and in case of China, export with government subsidies, in order to keep the same price here in the United States, to keep the price from rising too quickly in the United States. But since there's inflation going on anyway, that gives them an excuse to raise the price somewhat, but not as much as they would if all the tariffs were being imposed on the consumers. And as time goes on, more and more of that tariff is, in fact, passed on to the consumer, but not all of a sudden. So that's something that we need to take into consideration when we're talking about the tariffs of President Trump that he's going to be bringing in. And we've seen, Trudeau flew down to Mar-a-Lago for dinner with Trump, and the president of Mexico, Sheinbaum, also had a phone call with Trump after he started talking about 25% tariff on those situations. And I'm sure Canada has many things that they could slap tariffs on, but if it really gets down and dirty, the United States economy is stronger than the Canadian economy, and it's stronger than the Mexican economy. And they're the ones that are going to be shouting uncle before we are, if it really gets down to that point. But my hope is that the tariffs against China will eventually contribute to, or actually be the trigger to bring down the Chinese Communist Party. We know that rule is not going to go on forever. People used to think that the Soviet Union was going to last forever. Back in the 1980s, it was unthinkable that the Soviet Union would somehow fall. They did. And at least from the external perspective, they fell pretty rapidly because they could not, as I understand, they could not keep up with the arms race that President Reagan was imposing on them. Their economy simply could not sustain itself under those conditions. And Gorbachev tried to start reforming, and whoops, turned out to be a house of cards. You cannot reform a house of cards, right? You take out one card and the whole thing comes crumbling down. And that's exactly what happened in the Soviet Union. Now, China says that they learned from the Soviet Union. They've learned from them, and they're not going to make the same mistakes. Well, insisting on the gospel truth of Marxism is certainly a mistake. That is their fundamental mistake. All right. All right, I just got a couple more minutes here, and let's see. We didn't look at Breitbart at all today, did we? Oh yeah, here we go. I love this. Mental health crisis. Liberal women undergoing sterilization and blaming Trump. The idea of getting pregnant is worse than death. Back in the 1960s and 70s, the Korean government was encouraging people to have fewer babies because the country was still, developing its economy and so forth. And even when my wife and I began our family, when we started having babies in 1983, I'm sorry, 1882. Okay, we were blessed on October 14th, and then, as you know, there's a 40-day period of separation after the separation, meaning you're not having sex, you're not having intercourse for 40 days after the blessing. And so we began actually trying to have babies in November of 1982, and our first one came along in October of the next year. But at that time, also the government was encouraging people to have fewer babies, and so you could go to a pharmacy, which my wife did, and for free they would give you a thermometer and I'm out of time. A thermometer and a piece of graph paper. kids don't use graph paper anymore, but yeah, I know that. Okay. And graph paper. And the idea was that this could be used for family planning. I won't go into the details right now. I don't have time, but maybe you know how that works. I understand. But Father at that time was preaching against having fewer babies. He was always saying, have more babies, have more babies, have more babies. Well, now, what is it, 40 years later, I think Korea is kind of regretting that they were doing that back then, because now, of course, they have the lowest birth rate. They have the lowest birth rate in the world. 0.7, I think on average right now, a Korean woman statistically will have 0.7 babies during her lifetime, which is a serious problem. 2 or 2.1, 2.2 is the minimum level for maintaining a population. Anyway, so now we see that liberal women are doing the same thing. They don't want to have babies. Praise be to God. Praise be to God that they are not going to be multiplying themselves. That is good news. Yes. All right. God works in all sorts of different and mysterious ways. All right. Thank you very much for joining us this morning, and I will see you tomorrow. First the English version for half an hour, and then the Korean version for a half hour after that. Okay, I'll see you tomorrow. God bless, Godspeed. May His kingdom come quickly.